An ordinary evening. Quiet streets, nothing seems out of the ordinary. But one encounter changes everything. How far will those in power go when they think no one is watching? Find out now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. The city was quiet as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the streets. Dwayne Johnson jogged along the familiar path, his hood pulled over his head, his sunglasses shielding his face from recognition. He enjoyed these late evening runs, a rare moment of solitude away from the flashing cameras and the constant attention that came with his name. It was one of the few times he felt like an ordinary man, moving through the world unnoticed. But tonight, something felt off. The atmosphere carried a strange weight, a tension in the air that he couldn't quite place. A few blocks ahead, near a dimly lit convenience store, he spotted a police car parked at an angle, its red and blue lights flashing faintly but without the siren. Two uniformed officers stood by the vehicle, their stance rigid, aggressive. Facing them was a young black woman, no older than 20, clutching a bright patterned bag over her shoulder. She stood her ground, but Dwayne could see the tension in her posture, the way her fingers gripped the strap of her bag just a little too tightly. Something was wrong. As Dwayne approached, he slowed his pace, angling himself slightly to observe the scene without drawing attention to himself. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" one of the officers barked, pointing at the young woman. She hesitated, looking around as if searching for someone, anyone, who might step in. But the street was mostly empty, save for a few distant pedestrians who made a point to keep walking. "What's the problem?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with uncertainty. "We got reports of a disturbance at the protest earlier," the first officer said, narrowing his eyes. "You match the description of someone we're looking for." The woman furrowed her brow. "I was at the protest, but there were no disturbances. It was peaceful." The second officer scoffed. "Peaceful? That's what they always say. And yet, here we are." The woman shook her head. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just heading home." The first officer stepped forward, his hand resting on the baton at his waist. "You're looking real nervous. Maybe you got something to hide." She straightened her back. "I have nothing to hide." The second officer nodded toward her bag. "Then show us what's inside." Dwayne felt his fist clench instinctively. He had seen this before. This wasn't a routine check. This was intimidation, a power play meant to humiliate her. "No," the woman said firmly. "You have no reason to search my bag." The first officer's face darkened. "Oh, you think you got rights, huh? Listen, lady, when we say show us the bag, you show us the damn bag." "I know my rights," she shot back. The second officer chuckled. "That's cute. You think your rights mean anything right now?" Before she could react, the first officer lunged forward, snatching the bag from her shoulder with a sharp tug. "Hey!" she shouted, reaching to grab it back. The officer shoved her back. "Stay where you are." The second officer unzipped the bag and began rifling through it. Papers, flyers from the protest, a book, a compact mirror, and a cell phone tumbled onto the pavement. The phone hit the concrete hard, the screen cracking on impact. "Look at this," the second officer sneered, picking up a flyer. "Propaganda. You're one of those troublemakers, huh? This is my stuff. You have no right. You think we care about what you think we have a right to do?" the first officer cut in. Dwayne took a step closer, his hands tightening into fists. He didn't like where this was going. The second officer picked up her bag, inspecting it with mock interest before gripping it with both hands and ripping it in half. The fabric tore loudly, the sound echoing through the near-empty street. "Looks like your little movement is falling apart," he said, smirking as he tossed the remains at her feet. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She bent down to gather her things, her hands shaking with barely contained fury. "Pick it up and get out of here," the first officer ordered. "Or maybe you'd rather take a ride downtown." She didn't answer, her jaw tight as she grabbed the shattered pieces of her phone. The second officer reached into his belt and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "You know what? I changed my mind," he said. "You match the description of someone we're looking for, and I think you'd be a lot more cooperative in an interrogation room." The woman's head snapped up. "Description? Let me guess. Black? That's the whole description, isn't it?" The first officer's expression darkened, his grip tightening on the cuffs. "You keep running your mouth, and you're gonna regret it," he growled. The second officer reached for his baton. "Maybe we teach her a little lesson about resisting." He raised the baton, but before he could bring it down, his wrist was caught mid-air. A massive hand clamped around his forearm, stopping the strike effortlessly. "That's enough," came a deep, rumbling voice. Both officers turned to face the towering figure before them. Dwayne Johnson, standing motionless, gripping the officer's wrist like a steel vise. His sunglasses reflected the flashing lights of the patrol car, his stance unshaken. "Who the hell are you?" the first officer snapped. Dwayne didn't answer immediately. He tightened his grip slightly, making the officer wince. Then, with slow, deliberate calm, he spoke. "Someone who's tired of watching people like you get away with this." The second officer ripped his arm free, stepping back, eyes filled with sudden wariness. "Listen, pal, this isn't your business. Walk away before you get yourself in trouble." Dwayne's expression remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet, simmering fury. "You were saying something about resistance," he said, his voice dangerously low. The first officer sneered. "Oh, you think you're some kind of hero?" Dwayne tilted his head slightly. "No, but I know a bully when I see one." The tension in the air was suffocating. The woman, still kneeling on the ground, barely dared to breathe as the two officers sized up the man standing between them and their victim. "You just made a big mistake," the first officer hissed. The second officer reached for his baton again. Dwayne exhaled slowly. "You can walk away now," he said, his voice steady, "or you can find out what happens when you push too far." The officers hesitated for only a second. Then they made their choice. They attacked, and Dwayne moved. The moment the officers moved, Dwayne was already in action. The first officer lunged forward, swinging his baton in a wide arc aimed at Dwayne's ribs. But Dwayne was faster. He sidestepped with ease, catching the officer's wrist mid-swing and twisting it sharply. The baton clattered to the ground as the officer grunted in pain. Before he could react, Dwayne pivoted and drove his elbow into the man's chest, sending him stumbling backward. The second officer wasn't far behind. He pulled his taser from his belt and fired, but Dwayne anticipated the move. With a swift motion, he twisted to the side, avoiding the prongs as they zipped past him. In the same motion, he grabbed the officer's extended arm and yanked him forward, using the officer's own momentum against him. The man crashed into the side of the patrol car with a loud thud, the impact knocking the taser from his grasp. The first officer, recovering from the blow, pulled his gun from his holster, his breath ragged with fury. "You son of a—" Dwayne reacted instantly. Before the officer could raise the weapon, Dwayne stepped in, grabbing the officer's wrist and slamming it against the roof of the patrol car. The gun slipped from his grip, falling to the pavement. Dwayne swiftly kicked it away, sending it skidding into the darkness. The second officer tried to tackle him from behind, but Dwayne planted his feet and swung his massive frame around. With a perfectly executed spine buster, he lifted the officer off his feet and slammed him onto the hood of the car. The metal groaned under the weight of the impact, the officer gasping as the air was forced from his lungs. The first officer, now desperate, rushed forward again, swinging wildly. Dwayne ducked beneath the blow, then countered with a crushing rock bottom, sending the officer sprawling onto the asphalt. For a moment, there was only silence, save for the ragged breathing of the two downed officers. Dwayne straightened, adjusting his stance as he looked down at them. They groaned in pain, barely able to move. Behind him, Amali was still frozen in shock, her wide eyes darting between Dwayne and the men who had terrorized her only moments ago. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her hands still clutching the remnants of her torn bag. Dwayne turned to her. "Are you okay?" She swallowed hard before nodding. I think so." Dwayne gave her a reassuring look before shifting his attention back to the two officers. One of them stirred, coughing as he tried to push himself up. "You," the officer wheezed, "you're dead, you hear me? You just assaulted law enforcement. You think they won't hunt you down for this?" Dwayne sighed, rolling his shoulders. "You assaulted an innocent woman," he said, his voice calm but heavy with authority. "And if you think people are going to believe whatever story you try to spin, you haven't been paying attention." The second officer groaned, rolling off the dented hood of the patrol car and collapsing onto the pavement. "We'll say you resisted. We'll say you attacked first. You won't get away with this." Dwayne smirked. "You can try." The distant sound of approaching sirens cut through the air. Someone must have called for backup. Dwayne turned to Amelie. "You need to go." She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be fine," he assured her, "but they'll come after you next if you stay." Realizing he was right, she quickly gathered what little she could of her belongings. Before she could leave, she glanced up at him. "I don't know who you are, but thank you." Dwayne nodded. "Get somewhere safe." With one last look at the two groaning officers, Amelie turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows of the city. Dwayne exhaled, listening to the growing wail of sirens. The situation was about to get complicated. He glanced down at the officers one last time before making his decision. He wasn't going to be there when the backup arrived. With swift, precise movements, he darted into the darkness, disappearing down an alleyway just as flashing red and blue lights filled the street. Dwayne moved swiftly through the alleyways, his breath steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, bouncing off the narrow brick walls of the buildings around him. He knew he had only moments before the area would be swarming with police. The last thing he needed was to be caught standing over two beaten officers with no witnesses to support the truth. He wasn't worried about handling himself in a fight, but he understood the system well enough to know that once he was in custody, the narrative would be rewritten to paint him as the villain. He couldn't allow that to happen. As he reached a corner, he spotted a chain-link fence blocking his exit. Without breaking stride, he jumped, gripping the metal tightly and vaulting over in a single motion. His feet landed softly on the pavement below, and he immediately pressed forward. He needed to disappear before the police perimeter closed in. At the same time, chaos erupted back at the scene. Several squad cars screeched to a stop, their tires skidding against the pavement as officers poured out with weapons drawn. The two battered officers were still on the ground, groaning and struggling to get up. Their commanding officer, a grizzled-looking man with a thick mustache and piercing eyes, stepped forward, taking in the damage with a cold expression. "What the hell happened here?" he demanded. One of the downed officers, still clutching his ribs, forced out a response. Some guy attacked us. Big, strong as hell. Took us both down like we were nothing. The commanding officer narrowed his eyes. "You're telling me one guy did this? Who was he?" The officer spat blood onto the pavement and shook his head. "Didn't recognize him. But whoever he is, we need to find him." Another officer kneeled next to them, looking at the body cam footage. "Sir, their cameras were damaged in the fight. The footage is scrambled." The commanding officer exhaled sharply. "Of course it is." He turned to the surrounding officers. "We need all available units searching the area. Lock down the streets. No one gets out." Meanwhile, Dwayne had reached a quieter part of the city, slipping into a shadowed alley near an old warehouse district. He stopped for a moment, pressing his back against the cold brick wall, listening. The sirens were still active in the distance, but they weren't getting closer. For now, he was safe. He pulled his hood lower over his head and checked his surroundings. He needed a way to get out of this part of town without drawing attention. Walking back into the open streets wasn't an option, not with his size. He stuck out too much, even in a hoodie. Just as he was weighing his options, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out, then glanced at the screen. A blocked number. He answered cautiously. A voice came through, low and urgent. "You need to get off the streets, now." Dwayne's eyes narrowed. "Who is this?" "You don't have time for questions," the voice continued. "They're locking down the area. If you don't move now, you'll be surrounded." Dwayne didn't trust random calls, but something about the tone of the voice made him pause. Whoever this was, they knew what was happening. "Where am I going?" Dwayne asked. "See that warehouse across the alley?" the voice replied. "Door on the left side. It's open. Go inside, now." Dwayne glanced across the street. Sure enough, an old warehouse with rusted metal doors stood there, looking abandoned. He didn't have better options, so he moved quickly, keeping low as he crossed the alley and slipped inside. The moment he stepped through the door, it shut behind him with a soft clang. He tensed, ready for a trap, but the room was empty except for a single figure standing in the dim light. A young man, maybe late 20s, dressed in civilian clothes but with a police badge clipped to his belt. He had sharp features, dark brown hair, and an expression that carried both caution and determination. "You're a cop," Dwayne stated. The man nodded. "Technically, yes, but right now, I'm just someone trying to help you." Dwayne's posture remained guarded. "Why?" "Because I know what happened back there," the man said. "And I know those officers won't let the truth get out. They'll twist the story to make you the criminal." Dwayne studied him for a long moment before speaking. "What's your name?" The officer hesitated, then answered, "Kevin." "Kevin?" Dwayne repeated. "And why should I trust you?" Kevin exhaled. "Because I was listening to the radio when the call came in. 2 officers assaulted an unarmed woman. Then they got put on their asses by a mystery suspect. They didn't call for medical help first. They called their captain. You know what that means?" "They wanted to cover it up," Dwayne said. Kevin nodded. "And they will. If they catch you, you won't just be arrested. They'll make sure you disappear into the system." Dwayne remained silent, absorbing the information. He knew how corruption worked, but hearing it confirmed only made him angrier. Kevin glanced at his watch. "You've got maybe 20 minutes before they lock down the whole district. If you want out, I can help. But you need to decide now." Dwayne weighed his options. He didn't like running, but he wasn't about to walk into a setup either. "Fine," he said. "What's the plan?" Kevin motioned toward a side door. "I have a car a few blocks from here. It's unmarked, no police tracking. We get to it, I get you out of the area, and you lay low until we figure out the next move." Dwayne didn't have time to argue. "Let's go." As they slipped out the back door, the sirens in the distance grew louder. The hunt was still on, and it was far from over. Dwayne and Kevin moved quickly through the back streets, keeping to the shadows as they navigated the quiet alleys of the warehouse district. The wail of sirens echoed in the distance, growing fainter as the police focused their search on the main streets. Kevin led the way, his movements precise and calculated. He knew the city well, taking turns and shortcuts that avoided major roads. Dwayne followed closely, his instincts on high alert. He didn't fully trust Kevin yet, but for now the young officer was his best option. After several blocks, Kevin stopped near an old auto repair shop. He glanced around before pulling a key from his pocket and unlocking the door to a nondescript sedan parked in the alley. "Get in," he said, opening the driver's side. Dwayne didn't hesitate. He slid into the passenger seat, scanning their surroundings as Kevin started the car. The engine purred quietly, and Kevin pulled away from the curb without drawing attention. For the first few minutes, neither of them spoke. Kevin kept his focus on the road, taking side streets and avoiding traffic cameras. Dwayne studied him from the corner of his eye. He had the demeanor of someone who had been walking a fine line for a long time, someone who knew the rules but also understood when to break them. Dwayne finally spoke. "How long have you been a cop?" Kevin exhaled through his nose. 3 years. "You always help guys like me escape police lockdowns?" Kevin gave a dry smirk. "No, but I don't usually see guys like you put 2 officers on the ground without throwing a single illegal punch." Dwayne nodded, acknowledging the point. "So, why are you helping me?" Kevin's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. "Because I've seen how this works." Those 2 cops weren't just looking for trouble tonight. They were looking for a reason to exert their power. And when it backfired, they called their captain instead of medics. That means they weren't worried about protocol. They were worried about covering their asses. Dwayne listened carefully. "And their captain?" Kevin's expression darkened. "Briggs. He runs the department like his own personal kingdom. He protects the worst of them, the ones who get their hands dirty. He's covered up cases like this before, but this one's different. This time, there's a video." Dwayne sat up slightly. "Someone recorded it?" Kevin nodded. "Someone in a nearby apartment caught everything. The video was uploaded to social media, but it's already being taken down. Briggs is trying to bury it before it spreads." Dwayne leaned back, processing the information. "So, if I turn myself in now, the video disappears, and they make me the villain." Kevin glanced at him. "Exactly." Dwayne crossed his arms. "Then we don't let them bury it." Kevin hesitated. "I want to help, but you don't understand how deep this goes. Briggs has judges, prosecutors, even journalists in his pocket. If you go after him without a plan, you're not just fighting him. You're fighting the entire system." Dwayne's expression remained unreadable. "I've fought worse." Kevin sighed. "I had a feeling you'd say that." The car slowed as Kevin pulled into a parking garage. He guided the vehicle to an isolated corner and turned off the engine. He took a deep breath before turning to Dwayne. "All right. If you're serious about this, we need a strategy." Dwayne nodded. "What do we have?" Kevin thought for a moment. The video is still out there. We need to make sure it spreads faster than they can suppress it, but we also need proof that Briggs has been covering for dirty cops. If we expose him, everything else crumbles." Dwayne cracked his knuckles. "And where do we find that proof?" Kevin hesitated, then spoke carefully. "There's a records room at the precinct. Internal files, complaints, incident reports. If Briggs has been protecting his guys, the evidence is in there." Dwayne raised an eyebrow. "So, you're saying we break into a police station?" Kevin shook his head. "No, I break in. You're already wanted. If they see you, it's over." Dwayne smirked. "Not a fan of those odds?" Kevin sighed. "Neither am I. But if we get those files, we can prove everything. We take down Briggs, and the cops who did this to that girl don't walk away clean." Dwayne nodded slowly. He wasn't a fan of waiting on someone else to get things done, but Kevin had a point. If they were going to fight back, they needed more than just fists. Kevin checked his phone. "We lay low tonight. Tomorrow, I'll get into the precinct and pull the files. In the meantime, you need to stay out of sight." Dwayne exhaled through his nose. "Fine, but if things go south, I'm not sitting on the sidelines." Kevin smirked. "I figured as much." Dwayne leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. He knew this was only the beginning. The fight wasn't just about him. It was about something much bigger. And he wasn't about to back down. Kevin parked the car in an underground garage beneath an old apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. It was a safe house of sorts, a place he had used before when he needed to keep a low profile. Dwayne stepped out, scanning the area for any potential threats, but it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that felt unnatural in a city that never truly slept. Kevin led him up a back stairwell, keeping the lights off as they entered a small, sparsely furnished apartment. A couch, a desk with an outdated laptop, and a kitchen with barely anything in it. It was clear Kevin didn't spend much time here. He locked the door behind them and pulled the curtains shut before turning to Dwayne. "You stay here," he said. "I'll be back before sunrise." Dwayne leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "And if you don't come back?" Kevin hesitated. "Then you'll know I got caught." Dwayne didn't like it, but there wasn't much of a choice. He gave a single nod, and Kevin grabbed a duffel bag from the corner, slinging it over his shoulder. "If something happens, don't wait for me," Kevin added. "Get out of here." Dwayne didn't respond. He watched as Kevin slipped out the door, disappearing into the night. For a while, Dwayne stayed still, listening to the hum of the city outside. He hated sitting around while someone else took the risk, but Kevin was right. If Dwayne showed up at the precinct, it would be over before it even started. Time passed slowly. He paced the apartment, checking his phone, but there were no messages, no updates, just silence. Then, sometime past midnight, a noise from the hallway caught his attention. A faint creak. Dwayne tensed, his instincts flaring to life. Someone was outside. He moved silently toward the door, pressing his ear against it. Another noise, this time a quiet shuffle. Whoever was out there was trying to be discreet. Dwayne took a step back, rolling his shoulders. If they were coming in, he'd be ready. Then, boom! The door burst open, splintering off its hinges as 3 men in tactical gear rushed in, guns raised. Dwayne moved instantly. The first man aimed, but before he could fire, Dwayne lunged forward, grabbing the barrel of the rifle and yanking it upward. The shot went wild, embedding into the ceiling. With a powerful twist, Dwayne ripped the weapon from the man's hands and drove his elbow into his jaw, knocking him out cold. The second attacker swung the butt of his rifle at Dwayne's ribs, but Dwayne caught it midair, wrenching it away before delivering a devastating rock bottom, slamming the man onto the coffee table, which shattered on impact. The third man hesitated for a split second, long enough for Dwayne to grab a chair and hurl it across the room, hitting the man square in the chest. He staggered, and Dwayne closed the distance in 2 strides, catching him in a crushing spine-buster straight onto the floor. 3 men down. Dwayne exhaled, stepping over their unconscious bodies. He quickly searched them. No badges, no identifying marks. These weren't regular cops. His phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. Get out now. Dwayne didn't waste a second. He grabbed the duffel bag Kevin had left behind, kicked open the fire escape, and disappeared into the night. Kevin was right. Briggs wasn't waiting for the law to handle this. He wanted Dwayne gone. And now, the fight wasn't just about proving the truth. It was about survival. Dwayne moved through the darkened alleyways with the precision of a predator avoiding a trap. His heartbeat was steady despite the rush of adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The failed ambush confirmed what he had already suspected. Briggs wasn't waiting for the legal system to handle him. The corrupt captain wanted him silenced permanently. Kevin was still out there, and Dwayne had no idea if he had succeeded in retrieving the files or if he had already been compromised. His phone vibrated again in his pocket. He glanced down at the unknown number flashing across the screen. He debated ignoring it, but answered anyway. "Talk." Kevin's voice came through, low and tense. "You're alive? Good. They hit the safe house, didn't they?" Dwayne's jaw tightened. "Yeah, 3 of them. Tactical gear, not cops." A pause. "Briggs sent his personal unit. You need to disappear. They'll be combing the city for you now." Dwayne ducked behind a dumpster as a police cruiser rolled past the mouth of the alley, its spotlight scanning the walls. "Where are you?" Kevin exhaled sharply. "Still inside the precinct. I got the files, but getting out isn't as easy as getting in." Dwayne frowned. "You're trapped?" "Not yet," Kevin replied, "but they know something's off. Briggs has his guys watching the exits. I have a window, but it won't last long." Dwayne's mind worked quickly. "You still have access to the evidence room?" "Yeah, why?" "Drop the files somewhere safe. If they catch you, you can't have them on you." Kevin hesitated, then muttered, "There's a ventilation shaft behind the old interrogation rooms. No cameras. I can stash it there." "Do it," Dwayne said, "then get out." Easier said than done. The police force was in full lockdown mode. Briggs would be expecting him to be on the move, which meant they'd be guarding obvious exits and checkpoints. Dwayne needed a distraction. He made his way through the city's industrial sector, moving between abandoned buildings and railway storage yards. His size made blending in difficult, but the shadows were his ally. Finally, he reached his target, an electrical substation that powered half the district, including the police precinct. If Briggs wanted to control the system, then Dwayne would take that control away from him. He scaled the fence in one powerful movement, landing softly on the other side. Security cameras dotted the facility, but he moved fast, keeping below their angles. He reached a set of main circuit breakers housed behind a locked steel panel. A single well-placed strike shattered the lock, and he yanked the heavy switch down. The city flickered. Streetlights dimmed. The police precinct, along with surrounding buildings, went dark. He didn't wait around to admire his work. He was already on the move as sirens erupted across the district. Chaos spread as officers scrambled to respond to the sudden outage. Inside the precinct, Kevin took his chance. The moment the lights cut, he made his move, slipping through a maintenance corridor and into the lower level. He stuffed the stolen files inside the vent shaft, marking the panel with a small scratch so he could find it later. Then he turned to leave, only to freeze in place. Briggs stood at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, his expression a mask of cold calculation. Behind him, 2 officers blocked the exit. "Well," Briggs said, his voice dripping with condescension, "looks like we found our rat." Kevin's stomach tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Captain." Briggs stepped closer, his boots echoing against the tile floor. "You think I don't know what you've been up to?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You think I don't recognize betrayal?" Kevin squared his shoulders. "I don't know what you're talking about." Briggs chuckled. "Sure you don't." Before Kevin could react, Briggs moved. A sharp punch to the gut sent Kevin staggering back, his breath knocked from his lungs. He collapsed against the wall, coughing as pain flared through his ribs. Briggs crouched beside him, gripping his collar. "You made a mistake, kid. You picked the wrong side." Kevin glared up at him. "The only mistake was thinking you could get away with this forever." Briggs's smile vanished. He stood and signaled to the 2 officers. "Take him downstairs. We'll deal with him properly." Kevin was dragged to his feet. He struggled, but the officers were stronger. He was shoved forward, forced down a set of stairs leading to a basement level he had never been to before. A cold, damp smell filled the air. As they forced him into a room, Briggs leaned in close and whispered, "Your friend can't save you now." Kevin clenched his teeth. He wasn't so sure about that. Outside, Dwayne watched from a rooftop across the street. His plan had worked. Police were scrambling to handle the blackout, leaving gaps in their security. But something felt off. He had expected Kevin to be out by now. Something had gone wrong. He exhaled, rolling his shoulders. If Kevin was in trouble, then there was only one option left. Dwayne wasn't going to run anymore. He was going in. Dwayne moved with purpose, his mind calculating every step as he approached the police precinct. The blackout had done its job. Officers were scattered, confused, scrambling to restore power. He had a small window before Briggs regained control. He had to make it count. He stayed low, using the shadows as cover while he neared the rear entrance. A single officer stood guard, nervously holding his radio as he tried to get a signal through the disrupted power grid. Dwayne acted fast. He grabbed the officer from behind, covering his mouth as he yanked him backward. A precise strike to the back of the head, and the officer slumped unconscious against the wall. Dwayne dragged him into the alley, out of sight. The back door was locked, but locks weren't a problem for someone like Dwayne. He gripped the handle and forced it open with a single push, stepping into the dimly lit corridor. Emergency generators kept minimal lighting on, but the precinct was running on reserve power. The usual hum of electronics was gone, replaced by tense voices and hurried footsteps in the floors above. Dwayne needed to find Kevin. Fast. He moved through the hallways with precision, his ears picking up a familiar voice. Briggs. He followed the sound, staying out of sight as he rounded a corner and peered into a stairwell leading down. The voices were clearer now. Briggs was there, standing with 2 officers. Kevin was on his knees, his hands zip-tied behind his back. His face was bruised, his breathing heavy. Dwayne felt his blood boil. He stepped forward, his presence now undeniable. The moment Briggs saw him, his smug expression faltered for just a second before he regained control. "Well," Briggs said, crossing his arms, "looks like the big man decided to stop running." Dwayne's voice was steady. "Let him go." Briggs chuckled, shaking his head. You think this is a negotiation? You walked right into my station. You don't walk out." Dwayne's eyes flicked to the two officers. One reached for his gun, but Dwayne moved first. He launched forward, grabbing the officer's wrist and twisting it, forcing the gun to drop. With a powerful swing, he drove his elbow into the officer's jaw, sending him crashing into the wall. The second officer swung a baton, but Dwayne ducked, countering with a devastating spinebuster, slamming the man onto the concrete floor with enough force to leave him motionless. Briggs took a step back, reaching for his own weapon, but Dwayne was faster. He closed the distance, grabbing Briggs by the collar and slamming him against the wall. Briggs struggled, his bravado slipping as Dwayne's grip tightened. "You're making a mistake," Briggs hissed. "You think taking me down changes anything? The system protects its own." Dwayne's voice was cold. "Not this time." With a sharp move, he spun Briggs around and forced him onto his knees. He grabbed the zip ties from Kevin's wrists and used them on Briggs instead. Kevin groaned as he pushed himself up. "Took you long enough," Dwayne smirked. "Had to make an entrance." Kevin rubbed his wrists before looking down at Briggs. "We have the files. We have the video. This is over." Briggs glared at them, his breathing heavy. "You think people care? You think they'll believe you over me?" Kevin pulled out his phone, turning the screen to show a live stream. The entire scene. Briggs restrained, his officers defeated, Dwayne standing over him, was broadcasting to thousands of viewers. Kevin smirked. "They already do." Briggs's face paled. He knew it was over. The sound of sirens approached from outside, but this time they weren't coming for Dwayne. Backup had arrived, and this time Briggs was the one who wasn't walking away. Dwayne turned to Kevin. "Let's get out of here." Kevin nodded. As they slipped through the back exit, leaving Briggs to face his downfall, the weight of what they had just done settled over them. They had won. But Dwayne knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The story has ended, but the questions remain. What would you do in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and hit the bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching.